Hi, good afternoon, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Venkat, and on behalf of the archives at NCBS and the campus broadly, I welcome you to this very special event for the launch of the MS Swaminathan papers at the archives at NCBS. There are so many people to thank that we will be going through, but I do want to sort of just take a quick moment to sort of also thank many people who have visited, who are visiting us here from across the country. Dr. A.K. Singh from IARI, Mr. N. Ram from the Hindu, Mr. R.D. Iyer, Dr. R.D. Iyer, who's a former student of Professor Swaminathan, the trustees, the board of trustees of the Swaminathan Foundation, and the management of the Swaminathan Foundation. I do want to sort of give a shout out, of course, and thanks so much TNQ Technologies for the support and making an archive like this possible, and NCBS for believing in this over many years, and of course, Jitu will talk about that in detail. A quick sort of overview of what we're going to be doing today. We'll have a quick round of reflections and introductions by Satyajit Mayer, the Center Director of NCBS. We'll follow that up with a comment and a reflection from Madhura Swaminathan, the Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Swaminathan Foundation. We'll follow that up with a quick reflection from K. Vijayaraghavan, the former Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India. We are then going to be doing an overview of the collection to give people a sense of how one accesses it and give some snippets through this collection. We can't do justice to the collection through these snippets, but we hope to give you some idea of how broad the scope is. After that, we will have two short reflective talks by Dr. A.K. Singh and by Mr. N. Ram, reflecting both on agricultural histories and the collection's relevance, and reflecting on Ms. Swaminathan's life and work through this. And we'll wrap this up with a Q&A section, and we'll have refreshments set up outside. And the part that we're all, as archivists, most excited about, to be able to take you on tours of the archive. And if you have time, come and have a look at some of the material that we have kept out for you to check out. But of course, the catalog is up and running. So if you have your phones, you could start doing that right away. So without further ado, Satyajit Mayer, the Center Director of NCBS. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Venkat. So I just wanted to say a few words. And I'm actually going to read so that there's no subterfuge here. Well, while archives exist at both the national and state level, little material is available for historical study of sciences and the communities of research that are developed in India in the 20th and the 21st century. Also, there's little funding available to support such endeavors. Without such resources, it's hard to understand the evolution of our institutions, nascent although they are, but we need to understand how they evolved. And of course, also the research pathways that have developed within them, and whether they flourished or whether they were abandoned. At the same time, there's been an increasing interest nationally as well as internationally in the larger historical and sociological questions related to the development of these fields of science, which of course have huge implications on application. So history is not just a matter of dusty classroom or seminar debate. I borrow these words from somebody in the audience, Janaki Nair, but it is of great and urgent engagement in today's time. And it's, of course, often contested. In the sciences, we have the possibility of providing a distinct narrative, but complexity is the enemy of communication and acceptability. And since the best of science is always questioning, the history of ideas and its trajectory is always going to be a subject of very lively debate and discussion. The archives at NCBS was born to satisfy this need. The archives at NCBS is, as Venkat mentioned, a public center for the history of contemporary science in India. Besides its role as a research center, it has three broad objectives: reimagining the archives as a public space and commons, which will in fact strengthen the commons, we believe, commons around debate, a focus on creating new ways of education through archival material, and create an interinstitutional effort to develop a consortium of archives. So work is distributed, but can be accessed by many across the world. I'm actually extremely grateful, and I'll reiterate what Venkat just mentioned, to the support extended to the NCBS archives by Mariam Ram and the TNQ Technologies, and also for their faith in this endeavor. The recognition of this need by TNQ Technologies has allowed us to establish, I believe, extremely strong roots for a public research center that augments a nuanced understanding of the field of not only archives, but also of science. And exploring connections between scientific research and the archives, and its histories have been at the very heart of what the archives at NCBS stands for. And for this, I must thank the head of the archives, Venkat Srinivasan. Well, with support from the TNQ, we've been able to establish the Obaid Siddiqui Chair in the History and Culture of Science, for which we've already had an extremely exciting year with MD Madhusudan, and are now hosting our second chair, Professor G.M. Devi. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here today, but he is going to be contributing to this archive and also to research at the interface of linguistics and genetics, we hope. Today, we are launching the MS Swaminathan papers, a treasure trove in exactly what we've been talking about so far. And I look forward to what we have in store for us. I'm not going to steal any of anyone's thunder about even the private glimpses that I've had recently. But before I hand over the podium to Madhura, I'd really like to thank once again the management of the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation, the Board of Trustees, and in particular to the members of the management and Board of Trustees who are in the audience today, Dr. Madhura Swaminathan, Chairperson, Dr. T. Ramaswamy, Trustee, who I believe also encouraged the archives to be brought here. Miriam, of course, Professor Jiju Alex, and Dr. G.N. Hariharan, Dr. A.K. Singh, and Ram. I'm extremely grateful for you to come and reflect about what it means to have such an archive here, and of course to Dr. R.D. Iyer. I don't know if he's here, but he was certainly here yesterday, and we spent some time with him. So with that, Madhura.
Good afternoon. And I'm very happy to see this day and this archive come to light. So I want to just start on a personal note that when I was a young child during the Green Revolution, and we lived in the Pusa campus and cycled past the wheat fields, but didn't really know anything about what was happening or what was the significance. And then as you sort of grow older, become an adult, you want to establish yourself and do your own thing independently and not be part of the sort of legacy or the heritage in some way. And I think it is really, it's 10 years now where I've chaired the MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. And I think it's really been in this 10 years that importance of an archive, or importance of the legacy, importance of the materials that we need to understand our history, and to ensure it's not rewritten in the wrong ways, has become important. And I know this, I'm repeating what Jitu said, but I really want to thank the past and present trustees who are here today, in Ram, Veena Mishran, Mariam Ram, Jiju Alex, and T. Ramasamy, for being a pillar of support. And I know that sounds a very cliche word, a phrase, but they were a pillar of support in terms of, I think, coming from different walks of life and different sort of careers of their own, excellent careers, in seeing what was the legacy and in what was the role. Of course, MS Swaminathan Research Foundation is only one institution that has been created by MSS, and but he devoted sort of the last 30 plus years to it. So I think it did grow under his guidance after retirement. So it was an entirely post-retirement plan, but has, and I think it is during these last 10 years and in interactions with the trustees and with the staff and others that I've grown to sort of appreciate the importance of, the legacy and the history of, this being a historic moment, the whole wheat revolution and afterwards in India with the last 50 plus years. So I think that's all I want to say. And the last is that I think it's serendipity. I heard about the archive here and I came to see an exhibition and then was shown around the archive by Venkat, and thought it's a good place. It has the right kind of infrastructure. It's a center for biological sciences, but it's also on the campus of one of our leading agricultural universities, University of Agricultural Sciences, VK campus. So I think it would be in that sense very accessible to all scientists and agricultural scientists too. So I think this is, I'm happy that the trustees and I think unanimously felt that this was a good place to house it in. So I will hand over to Venkat. I'll just say one thing that I'm not going to bring it here to the stage, but we have brought a copy of all the books written by MSS and his biographies. Dr. Iyer may turn up later. I think he has given a signed copy of his biography to the archive, as well as some tapes, audio tapes, not tapes, pen drive with audio recordings of his conversations with Nitya Rao, which is also a book now. But I hope we can start on the oral archive as well after this. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to Dito for NCBS hosting this.
Thank you so much, Makral. Could I call upon Professor K. Vijayaraghavan to speak a few words on this occasion? Thank you.
Thank you, Venkat. Good evening, everybody. It's I should say that I'm a surprise speaker this evening, and it's a surprise even to me. So forgive me for not being prepared, but this is absolutely fantastic to hear what's happening today. And I'd like to congratulate particularly Venkat and his team for, not only doing this, but really taking the archives to a level where it becomes not merely a recollection of what's happened at NCBS, but also what's happened in the entire science system in the country and linked to the science system worldwide. So this is absolutely terrific. I won't talk about Professor Swaminathan. You all will hear about him a lot. And, he's really been an icon for many of us growing up. I'll just say that, where he stands out is for the following reason. If you look at our best science institutions, one major criticism of them is that they are a short walk from India. In other words, they could be in levitation anywhere. Their rootedness is questionable, and their impact on society around us immediately even more so. And conversely, the society itself seems not to have any connect with what is going on inside this. In some ways, this is a consequence of necessity. To build excellence, you need some isolation. It's not easy to do that if you're not isolated. But the challenge today is, having built that excellence, how does one open up walls and barriers and therefore have a connect with society around us? And the archives is one very important way of doing that. Now, Professor Swaminathan embodies, right from the earliest stages in his career, a combination of addressing problems by doing science at its really excellent level, but also a connectivity with society. And one could argue that this is a consequence of, being involved in plant breeding, which by definition, agriculture and plant breeding does this. But this is not such a simple task, and it's not an easy task to have impact. Watch your step there. To actually be involved in plant breeding requires sustainability, getting a team to work, and making sure that what you do in a laboratory setting, the setting of a greenhouse or a small plot is taken to a larger plot and to the field. It has to be successful in the market. So all of this is no small task, and it's really formidable to see one person drive this along with, of course, a large team over many, many decades. This is absolutely stunning. I was once in the office of the Secretary Agriculture to the Government of India a few years ago, and noticed Professor Swaminathan's name on the list of Agriculture Secretaries. So he's rather unusual in being both the Director General of the Indian Council of Agricultural Research and the head of the Department of Agricultural Research, but also being the Agriculture Secretary. There are very, very few people who have done both. Being an Agriculture Secretary requires you to deal with the actual real world and the problems one faces there, whereas research can be in at least many aspects relatively isolated. So this is absolutely fantastic. Now going forward, this is absolutely really excellent that you have these archives started. Going forward, what do we do? The world today is in a very unusual situation where the ability of scientists to communicate science is not been very effective, at least to half the population in most countries. The other half probably misunderstands it. The one half distrusts it, and the other half misunderstands it. So communication is a really very big challenge. And the challenge in communication is that most of us end up hectoring about what correct science is and what is not. And therefore, for it to be effective now, we need this to be a two-way process. And that's not easy. So the archives and institutions which have an interface with science and society are very, very important. And that's something which the NCBS has actually tried to do over many years. Janaki Nair is here. She had a science and society program. Indira Chowdhury drove the archives in many ways at the early stages. And there have been other programs which have taken place. So this is a really good time to take this forward. And it's very, very pressing at this stage, given the context which we're facing globally of climate change, loss of biodiversity, sustainable development. And therefore, these islands of excellence need to link with the rest of the world in an enormously effective way, taking inspiration from the work of Professor Swaminathan, who did that in agriculture, in farmers' welfare, and a host of other related areas. But we need to now do this across the spectrum in health and education, in energy, and so on. So this would be just a beginning of the kind of archives we need in many other areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vijay. Thank you. All right, so we're going to do a collection overview, and just give me a moment while I switch slides. And okay, and hopefully this is visible to those of us on Zoom as well, right? Okay, fantastic. So thank you for these reflective talks, and it's my honor really to sort of do this, but I stand here only as a representative of many other archivists who've been working on this. So I'll be talking about them in a moment. As Chitu had mentioned a little while back, the archive at NCBS, for those of you who are perhaps new to this forum, is a public collecting archive for the history of science in contemporary India. And we're very committed to this idea, and we sort of look forward to material from the broader public, and having the honor of getting these papers and processing it as sort of really going in that direction of what this archive can do. There are four broad functions we think for archives in general, but we think this is true, for the archives at NCBS, but something that we think is relevant for archives broadly. The archive, of course, is a collecting center, which collects material for the public to use. we see it as a site to also interrogate research and push the frontiers of archival sciences, something that's really not done very often in India. And we think that's a way to sort of build collaborations with people in legal work, in work on the code of ethics, in work on semantic annotations, education, and such. We also work with a variety of educators in bringing the archive out into schools and colleges. That's something that we're particularly keen and excited about. And of course, a gathering like this, which is sort of public engagement and building awareness around the idea of an archive, so that maybe someone in this audience right now says that, I think I have a letter from Professor Swaminathan. Maybe this is a good place to send it out to. So, and the answer is yes. A quick short preface again for people who may not be necessarily familiar with the world of the archive, and this is sort of a disclaimer note. The launch of a collection is really the beginning of the collection, and I really want to stress this. It is an extraordinary collection that the trustees have donated, but it is still the beginning of the collection, and we really hope that people from this audience realize what they might have and how that can make it accessible. So the archive will always be in a state of incompleteness. I just want to put this disclaimer out. And it's not going to be an exhaustive space, but we want to ideally tend towards that point of being complete to the extent possible. It isn't neutral either, but it can get towards that as the asymptote goes. Some nuance from having a diversity of sources that can, that bring in material. And of course, it's something that students that I work with are really tired of hearing me say, which is that archives do come from stories and they're launch pads for future stories. And especially what Jitu had mentioned, archives are really stronger when they speak to each other, when we're talking about an interconnected network in this country, something that we have a real potential to do at this point, and really to the world. The archives are meaningless if they're not examined. So I do hope you come and examine the archive. I want to sort of reiterate that this is made possible with an extraordinary amount of support from an institution that has really let the archives do a bunch of things. So really grateful to Jitu, Uma, and the rest of the management here to let this happen. To TMQ for the support and the vision that they've had in supporting an endeavor like this, and the Swaminathan Foundation for having the vision to say, let's deposit this material at this archive and let's see what happens. So thank you. But the biggest thanks at this point really go out to these extraordinary 8 individuals. And I'm so proud to have worked with them. And they are the best archivists one can really hope for. And the commitment they've shown to this collection and made it their own is something else. So really thank you to all these people. The first archivist, of course, is MS Swaminathan, the proto-archivist, as I like to say. And then, of course, Dr. Raman, who's in the audience, who's really sort of taken the pains over so many years and decades to sort of make sure this collection stays. This is very, very unusual. I've done enough archiving now to know this. Sangeeta, who on a chance decided to move to MSSRF in the early days of the pandemic to set up the first accession of material, and who was really instrumental in sort of setting the tone for this work. And I'm not sure if she's on Zoom, but if she is, I hope she's around for this. The material moved to Bangalore, where Ravi, who's the person who everyone sees but is never able to catch, and Ravi has been instrumental in really sort of ensuring that the collection sort of finds a good home in this space. Sanjana, who joined us a year down the line and was really instrumental in shaping the second accession of material that came into the space. She was ably helped by Swati, Malvika, Niranjana, and Soumya, who's in the audience, who's just put an extraordinary amount of work in the last 2 months to make this possible. So thank you to all of you for doing this. It really means a lot that you've taken this and owned it and shaped it the way you think possible. I should also sort of, give a shout out to the people of the archive, and you know who you are, and that includes, Aditi, who's sitting in the back, who sort of designed all the publicity and merchandise that you'll see outside, and to Neha, who's been sort of taking care of the catering that's going on. So do please look at the material that's sitting outside when you step out. So the collection, as was mentioned in the brochures that were sent out, in the publicity material, has over 48,000 archival objects. It spans 80 years of material. There is 3 terabytes of data on our servers, and we've said 5 languages, but that is incorrect. As we keep looking at it more carefully, it's more than that. But broadly in English, with a significant amount of Hindi, Urdu, and then it sort of tails off. There's Japanese, there's another language that I'm not remembering right now, I apologize. But it is extraordinary. This is the map of the Swaminathan papers. In the archival jargon, we call it a finding aid, but it has 9 broad sections. with multiple subsections, and the online catalog will tell you all about the details. I don't need to go into that, but it will give you a sense of how widespread this is. It includes interactions and connections across 22 administrative bodies of the government or committees that MS Swaminathan has been involved with. It has correspondence over 60 plus years. There are photographs from an unbelievable number of events. More importantly, they have been kept, which is the part that surprises me. But the part that I want to sort of point out, what I was telling Jayesh and Arvind when we were here, is media, something that generally an archive would not keep, because media material would be kept in the media archives. But this is particularly unique. It is the kind of curation that has gone into collecting material, looking at 60 years of agricultural media reports, is in and of itself amazing. You can look at all kinds of journals that are no longer existing. There are defunct magazines and newspapers that you'll see through this archive. And you'll also see some fun advertisements along the way. And last but not least, there is, this just came by chance with the collection series 9, which is institutional historical material related to the history of IARI itself, which has just been kept as part of the collection, but kept separately. Material that was handed over to MS Swaminathan likely when he took on, the head of the institution. And this is really interesting material from the early days, going back to when it was the Imperial Agricultural Research Institution. So this is sort of the broad overview of the collection. How do you access the collection? I don't want to go into these details, but very simply, if you have your phones, you can just go to the archives website and click access, which will tell you how to look through it. The archive is open. We would love for you to just come and visit, because we get to know you a little bit more. So it's open on weekdays and it's open on weekends by appointment. But if you can't come in person, send us requests. That's what we've been doing over the last 2.5 years anyway. We set things up on an online drive and we get the word out to you. We also had a book published. Someone published a book using material from the archive during the pandemic. So that was nice. All right, I'm just going to, before I go into the navigating of the catalog, before I go into the overview, the way you access the catalog is you just go to the archives homepage and you click catalog, which will take you to a page like this, and you click collections, which will take you to all the collections in the archive that are processed. There will be more on this website, and then you go into this one called Swaminathan. And I just want to sort of give you a sense of how this is laid out. This is already opened here, so I'm just going to open this here. And it'll give you a sense of what the overview of the collection is, what dates the material is from, what are the conditions governing the access, a brief biographical note. This is something that we write generally for all the collections that we have. This is obviously by no means exhaustive. The extent of the collection, the various languages, the way it's been arranged, and this is critical, especially for scholars, to understand how the material has been arranged, where it came from, just so that you understand that context of where it came from. And a little bit of a note about how to understand and read the archive. So there's a note here, and a note about where it came from, so that a generation from today we at least acknowledge and understand what the sources are. And these are fields that we will keep adding, the subject fields, and this is how we end up building an interconnected archive through these sort of subject indices, and a broader note about who actually worked on this going forward. The actual collection is accessed by looking at this really large collection organization that you see on the right, which you can open out as much as you want. So just to give you a sense of each, there are 2 large groups of material. Within each group, you have research notes from the 1960s, you'll have correspondence from various sections. So I'm not going to go into this. I just want to give you a flavor of how you might navigate the archive. And once you get into everything has been meticulously described by these 8 archivists that I speak of. And I just pulled out one object here. So this is up down to the level of the folder or the address, which will give you a sense of what it's about, when it's from, how to access it. And this is what you would ask the archivist to say this is what you want to get access to. And if you're not here and you're sitting somewhere in Delhi, that's fine. We'll make it available to you. So that's the overview of the collection, but I'm sure you're here to try and get some snippets into the collection. So a glimpse into this collection. And at this point, I need to give a shout out to Sanjana, who's been the person who's really developed this presentation. She's sitting in Geneva right now, so she's probably sitting online on the call as we speak. A glimpse into the collection. So I'm just going to go through a variety of sections to give you a flavor of the kinds of stuff that is there. These are research diary notes going back in time from the early, from 1987. These are discussions with Egyptian officials that you can see. So there's an entire section on research conversations. This has a nice tie-in, and Soumya, whom hopefully you have an opportunity to meet her later, she can show you some connections with Egypt over the years, and there's the collections of material from Egypt later in the years as well. If we look at correspondence, there are different kinds of correspondence. There is, the letter on the left, which is from 1954, when he was appointed as an assistant cytogeneticist at IARI. And then there is, really sort of in the peak of the Green Revolution work, this box that all of us really like. We call it box 46, which is an amazing set of correspondence and conversations with people across North India, reaching out to IARI, reaching out to Swaminathan, asking for seeds. And it's this repetitive process that is particularly interesting. This is a request from a secondary school in Haryana for the Sharpati Sonora to plant in their space, 1967. The Nuclear Research Laboratory, something that is very rarely really covered. It's we have documents relating to the proposal for the establishment all the way to the inauguration, and there are a couple of other images. So there are sections relating, and all of these are from different sections of the archive, administrative sections, photographic sections. So this curation has been done by Sanjana. This might be of interest to a lot of people here. There's material around the Silent Valley project in a couple of different directions. So this is a memorandum submitted by the Silent Valley Scheme Protection Committee to the Governor of Kerala sometime in 1977. But there's also a map created by the Electricity Board outlining the area and so on and so forth. These are just two documents from a very large file that is there in the collection. This might be familiar to some of you in the audience. There was a very famous meeting between MS Swaminathan and Pope John Paul II around the time that the Food and Agriculture Organization completed 40 years. So these are all from different sections. The image on the bottom is from the media clippings. The image on the top is part of the personal section of the archive, an invitation from the Pope. And the image on the right is from an administrative section of the archive looking at a draft report of a plenary meeting in 1985. There is considerable amount of material from his time at the International Rice Research Institute in Manila, Philippines. The image on the right is a greeting card on his birthday in 1984 from fellow employees of IRRI. And then something in very different tone is a letter on the left from the president of the Philippines sent to Swaminathan around the time that he was ending his tenure as a director of IRRI. And these are again, in different sections of the archive. There's of course quite a bit around the Ramon Magsaysay Award. All the way, we have material, the citation, the certificates. That's what you see on the left, and a lovely volume of media clippings from the award ceremony, but also photographs from the award ceremony. And this one in particular is really nice because it's a photograph of Meena Swaminathan visiting schools during the trip to Philippines. And I think it's particularly interesting because this is a way in which you sort of see the archives branching off into multiple directions. What I'd mentioned earlier, that archives are vessels for stories, but they become launch pads for other kinds of stories. So this is an archive not just for agricultural histories, but it's also an archive to understand a little bit of educational histories in the country. These are a couple of letters around, just sticking around the idea of awards. The letter on the left that you see was sent to Swaminathan on August 7th, 1987 by Devaki Nandan Prasad of the Bihar Progressive Farmers Association, where he expressed his wish to attend the World Food Prize ceremony. The first, Swaminathan was the first awardee of this World Food Prize. And the letter on the right is a lovely handwritten note from Varghese Kurian in 1989 when Kurian won the award. And it's a note just to say, thank him, to say that, looks like I have informally, you've told me that I've been selected to be the third winner of this food prize. All kinds of writings. I'm just giving you a small glimpse. The image on the left is an image from the Illustrated Weekly of India in 1978, titled The Story of Wheat. And this is from a broader section on media articles and such. The image on the right is part of an IARI report section in the archives, which is titled Need There Be a Famine in 1975. A lot of the material, if you read today, you will start to, the age-old phrase of, history bears repeating. So there'll be constant sort of ways in which you'll see ideas in this reflect in ways that are relevant today. There is, of course, a very famous article that many of you in the audience, or maybe some of you in the audience would be familiar with, called The Great Gene Robbery by Claude Alvarez. And so there's a lot of material around that article, and the rejoinder to that, here's a letter from Manmohan Singh in support of Swaminathan in this article that was called The Gene Robbery from 1986, but also a rejoinder article written by Swaminathan in the same publication, the Illustrated Weekly, responding to Claude Alvarez's report. And this, we're just giving samples. There are many, many letters and many such articles, of course. And this is the section that I was talking about, which excites me in particular because it really sort of goes back much further than I imagined this archive would actually go, which is to look at a letter from 1937, which discusses administrative control over the Imperial Agricultural Research Institute. And this is in a section which looks at the history of IARI broadly, which has many subsections on B.B. Pal's correspondence, B.R. Murthy, a scientist who was involved there and such. I'd like to sort of wrap this flyover with a couple of, getting back to things that are more sort of grounded and personal. The image on the left is a passport that we found of M.S. Swaminathan's father. This is from 1933. It's called the British Indian passport. And the image on the right, which I understand has been circulated quite a bit, is a photograph of the family. M.S. Swaminathan, Meena Swaminathan, and their 3 daughters. We say circa 1960s. We haven't pinned it down, but I'm sure Madhura could help us identify exactly when this was from.
7 years old.
So, and I'd like to wrap up this overview with this thing that Sanjana had pulled out from the archive, which is the poem "Auguries of Innocence" by William Blake, which was published in 1863. And this is part of a personal notes section in the Swaminathan collection. And this is handwritten by Swaminathan without a date, so we can't really know what it is. But we thought the excerpt was perhaps particularly apt for the occasion and what this collection is. And I'll just read it out if you can't read it. To see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. So we thought it would be a good fitting way to sort of describe the extent of the collection, but also the extent of the body of the work that is in this collection. So thank you, really. This was a very, very quick overview, but really, if you want to get into it, you have to come to the archives, spend weeks, months, years with us. But if you don't have the time, the catalog is there for you to check it out from wherever you are. But we do hope to see you in the archives. Any questions that you have, you can send them over to archives@ncbs.res.in. And we do look forward to research queries going forward. We also ask for your indulgence, in the event that we're not able to respond to you directly, because we imagine we'll have an onslaught of questions in the next week, but we're there to help you out. So thank you again. I would like to call upon Dr. A.K. Singh now to just reflect on the collection and also reflect on IARI and its histories. Thank you.
Thanks, Venkat, and it's a wonderful collection. I feel really privileged to be part of this great event today. And I bring the greetings of the students and the staff of IARI on this very special occasion. IARI intrusions is the Karma Bhumi of Dr. Swaminathan, where he worked for bringing green revolution. 1967-68, India's wheat production was 12 million tons. And last year we produced 109 million tons of wheat. We exported 8 million tons of wheat to other countries amidst the crisis of USSR and Ukraine. It would not have been possible but for the vision of Dr. Swaminathan with support of Dr. Borla. Another area where we see a huge contribution is in field of basmati rice research. As early as 60s, he realized the importance of combining the quality of traditional basmati into high-yielding varieties. And it took 20 years of hard work through his student, Dr. Siddiq, Dr. V.P. Singh, and others. We followed later to come out with the first dwarf variety in 1989, Pusa Basmati 1. At that time, India was exporting 200 crores of basmati rice. Today, India is exporting 30,000 crores of basmati rice every year. And that brings happiness to the millions of farmers and their families and has improved their standards of living. As Chairman Farmers Commission, Dr. Swaminathan's contribution are enormous, which are not much talked about. He was the one who recommended the government to change the name of the ministry from Ministry of Agriculture to Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare. And that's how the ministry name was changed. He was a champion of farmer from beginning. When the dwarf wheat came, the first challenge was to produce large quantity of seed, how to do that. And he visualized the participation of farmers in Jayanti village, established the seed village concept. And in one of conversation, he told that Ashok, it is better to do the technology demonstration on the poorest of the poor farmers' field. Then others will say, if he can do, I can also do it. So that's how he, he started the seed village concept, and that brought the complete change. And later, another recommendation as Farmers Commission's chairman was awarding farmers with Padma Award. And today we have at least 15 farmers have been awarded with Padma Shri. Prior to that, there was no Padma Award for farmers. And that was a recommendation from Dr. Swaminathan in his report. Also, the famous C2 plus 50% MSP fixation, this recommendation came from him. Still, there are issues on that, but that's what farmers always remember when we go and interact with farmers. The National Food Security Bill was another recommendation that was passed by Parliament. And you see that for last 2.5 years, because of this bill, the government is providing to 80 crores people free rations for last 2.5 years during the period of crisis of Corona. So Dr. Swaminathan often used to quote, Gandhiji, saying that to a hungry man, the God can appear only in form of bread. I say that when we take our, breakfast, lunch, dinner twice a day, the God who appears before each one of us, 137 crores of people, women, children, men, rich and poor alike, that God is none other than Dr. Swaminathan. His contribution is so enormous, and I think this is something that needs to be told to the people and to the generations, young generations in particular, to remember with every meal Dr. Swaminathan when we have our breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that will be a kind of real tribute to this great hero, Professor Swaminathan. Thank you, NCBS and Madhura, for making me part of this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. May I please call upon Mr. N. Ram to come and say a few words. Thank you.
The opening of the MS Swaminathan papers at the archives at NCBS today is an event of profound historical significance. The gifting by the MSSRF trustees of these archival papers virtually doubles the number of processed objects held by the archives now. And I read in a note sent by Professor Venkat Srinivasan that this is about to go up further, perhaps like wheat production. It will double, triple, and quadruple very soon. But the significance of this opening is not adequately captured by the numbers, 48,000 plus, and Madhura hinted, and counting. And you may also get from other sources. 3 TB of data, 5 plus languages, spanning 80 years, and we got an idea from Professor Venkat Srinivasan of the nature of the material. Of course, we need to note here that some precious material was lost in the floods. I don't know what they were, but it was primary material. Some years ago, they could not be saved. This happens all the time with papers that should be preserved, but given the situation as it is here or in even developed countries, I think this must be accepted. So that underlines the point that Venkat made, that it can never be complete. Archives can never be complete. They can be comprehensive, perhaps, but completeness is a pipe dream. But you try to fill in that gap. The significance here lies equally, perhaps more than equally, in the quality of the material that has been opened today. And it also lies in the quality of the life and work of the man who animates and whose life and work animate and shine through this material. Am I indulging in some kind of exaggerated praise, the typical hagiography that you encounter in biographies of great achievers? Am I indulging in an overflow of sentiment or sentimentalism? As a friend of Professor Swaminathan and as a former trustee of the MSSRF, I think not. But before I reflect on the life and work of the man, that was what I was invited to do in his multiple spheres of influence, a task which Center Director Professor Satyajit Mayer assigned to me. Let me say a few words on the importance of archives. Archives hold a special fascination for me, as I suspect it does for many of you. I read history before I became a journalist, and as a research student, I delved into the Tamil Nadu government archives at Egmore, a wonderful resource. While researching the life and work of the writer R.K. Narayan for a biography, I found my wonderful material in the archives of Narayan, personal archives of Narayan, and also his literary promoter and lifelong friend Graham Greene. More recently, I don't know, some of you may have read about it, the S. Radhakrishnan papers went to the archives at Ashoka University, gifted by the former president of India's daughter-in-law, Indira Gopal. It was facilitated by Keshav Desiraju, the late Desiraju. And it's a wonderful gift. But the point that I noted just now before I came, looking at that archive, is it doesn't seem to provide instant access or ready access, unlike the access at NCBS. That is a real, I'm not sure about this. This needs to be verified. It says log in, and it doesn't give you any button where you can click and get into the archive. But I must find out more about it. But this is some instant research, which did suggest a world of difference. Venkat, you'll be pleased to know this. It may not be that pleased to know as an archivist, because you want to collaborate and cooperate and share. But if they do not share for whatever reason, assuming they do not share, then that would be a pity. But it is a great archive. It is a great gift. We have only a preliminary idea from the overview, an excellent overview, but it gave us only a preliminary idea of the contents of the MS Swaminathan papers. But I would venture to say that this is the most important record, that is an authentic, reliable, and usable record of the life and work of a consequential man of science that has landed in a public collecting center in recent decades. I don't know of any other. A first-rate, full-length biography of MS Swaminathan is long overdue. There have been some attempts, but they're simply not good enough. I can say that candidly. One would hope that the accessibility, the content of this archive and the accessibility it provides enthuses somebody, a good biographer, the good writer, not a hagiographer, to start working on this material. And I think nowhere, this is a wonderful place to start. Of course, we know that oral historians have interviewed Swaminathan, have recorded this, and a lot remains to be collected. But this is a wonderful place to start. Borlaug has his biographers. There's several of them if you search, if you go to Amazon. And As for this, let me take a cue from this pithy description of in the NCBS archive brochure that was sent to us earlier, and I quote from that. The collection captures the life and work of MS Swaminathan, the plant geneticist, agricultural scientist, humanist, and scientific administrator, most popularly known for his work on the Green Revolution. First, as a plant geneticist, I don't have the credentials to assess this work, but I've read quite a bit about it. And it is clear that it made a profound difference. I recently read this book by Charles C. Mann called From the Wizard and the Prophet, Science and the Future of Our Planet. I would recommend it. It's a work of popular science by a very fine writer. Perhaps some oversimplification is there, but it's well worth reading. And basically it talks about wizards and prophets. Wizards are, the typical wizard here is Norman Borlaug, who believed that science and technology can overcome problems if you persevere, if you exercise ingenuity, the scientific spirit, and so on. And the antagonist, if you like, was William Watt, who has been described as an apocalyptic environmentalist, who believed that unless humankind drastically reduced consumption, its growing numbers and appetite would overwhelm the planet's ecosystem. And interestingly, there's a whole chapter in this book on MS Swaminathan, who and his work with Norman Borlaug. For me, that was the most interesting part of the book, and also the part of the material that I suspect, I'm not sure about it, how much of it is available here, contained in these archives. Let me quote from Charles Mann's assessment of Swaminathan's work. By the way, Charles Mann was invited by MSSRF in 2018. And he came and interviewed Professor Swaminathan over several sessions, but those interviews are not yet in hand, although they've been promised, I believe. So this is what Mann, the science journalist, says about Swaminathan. That Swaminathan became Borlaug's friend and partner, but one can easily imagine an alternate history in which Swaminathan would have played the leading role. He led we know what he did about the Green Revolution. Pioneered in Mexico in the 1950s, the package would have its greatest impact in Asia, and especially South Asia. The structured wheat would meet similarly restructured rice. Swaminathan's work had direct impact on more people than Borlaug's work. We don't want to make those crude comparisons, but looking at the numbers, this is true. Later, he sometimes criticized the Green Revolution he had helped to establish. And then comes an interesting sentence. He was a wizard who became a prophet, or almost. And that takes you to what Professor Swaminathan termed the Evergreen Revolution. I don't know enough about it. I don't know if anybody does. It's a work in progress, but he has certainly addressed this question and it has been welcomed. So there's also a letter from Norman Borlaug that I believe is in this archive, which reads as follows. The Green Revolution has been, it was dated November 10th, 1970. The Green Revolution has been a team effort, and much of the credit for its spectacular development must go to Indian officials, organizations, scientists, and farmers. However, to you, Swaminathan, to you, Dr. Swaminathan, a great deal of credit must go for recognizing the potential value of the Mexican dwarfs. Had this not occurred, it is quite possible that there would not have been a Green Revolution in Asia. Who knows? But that's an interesting thought. In this discussion, The writer says that I oscillate between the two stances, that is, Borlaug versus Vogt, William Vogt. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I think Vogt was correct. On Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, I go for Borlaug. And on Sunday, I don't know. Some Sundays, perhaps, he thinks of MS Swaminathan, whom he came to interview in Chennai, I believe. Now, this is the work. This is Swaminathan as a scientist who really worked in the field, who tried to narrow the gap or bridge the gap between the lab and the field. But there were many other Swaminathans. Swaminathan as an institution builder in several institutions, wherever he went. And I think running through that, a thread is a commitment to creating national agricultural research systems. And in this book, where he's in conversation with his youngest daughter, Nitya Swaminathan, he regrets the fact that there's been a decline in this, focus on this, that even in India, I think we have to mention this, some of the work is being handed over to international agencies instead of building your own strengths. This is a criticism that he makes. You have to look into it to see if it has any merit. That's an area which I think is extremely important. Swaminathan's influence also was considerable as a communicator, as a voice for science, articulate, always clear-sighted, measured, and at the end of the day, persuasive. There's a story here about in the Wizard and the Prophet about this policy of battle that took place in the heart of Delhi, within the government, where the Tsar of the then Planning Commission, Ashok Mehta, was obdurate in refusing to make any financial allocation for importing the Mexican varieties. And Borlaug went and shouted at him, saying, "You're going to lose the elections." Swaminathan, I think, contrived this. So Professor Swaminathan quotes in this book, in this conversation, C. Subramaniam, the then agriculture minister, as saying that this was perhaps the finest hour in Norman Borlaug's life when he shouted at Ashok Mehta. And apparently that swung the game in favor of imports and all that happened as a result. The Swaminathan was wonderful with the media. I think this has to, I don't know if you do it in NCBS, but over the years, I've attended these, I've noticed or attended some of these workshops. Professor M.S. Swaminathan knew who specialized in the fields he was interested in all over the country, and he would invite them for workshops, not for an hour or two, but lasting a couple of days. And I think this made a huge difference to the coverage of the work of not only MSSRF, but all the other projects that Professor Swaminathan was involved in for the last three or four decades. And this, I think, is an important learning for all of us, for all research institutions, all institutions that specialize in particular fields. And I think he saw this. And finally, his handling of criticism and even fierce attacks. There's a lesson to be learned there. He was savagely attacked, he and the Green Revolution. There were allegations of data falsification on the work done. Of course, these allegations were investigated, and finally, it was found that there was nothing improper that had happened. There was no misconduct of any kind. These were errors. But, and this is mentioned in the book, that's why I mentioned it here in this conversation. But throughout that period, it appears he responded in a measured way, in a rational way, fact-based, reasoning with his critics, even on the Green Revolution. Venkat mentioned that article, I remember that period. I think it caused Professor Swaminathan much distress because it was an all-out attack using whatever ammunition those who are opposed to this pursuit of productivity, so on. They threw all kinds of ammunition, all kinds of charges against the votaries of the Green Revolution and so on. And it caused great distress to Professor Swaminathan, but the way he responded was a lesson for all of us. Not angrily, not by contempt or disdain, although some of that material deserved that, but in a measured way, in a scientific way. And finally, I remember that article, that response was published after quite an effort to convince the then editor of the Illustrated Weekly. I had a role in, I was able to observe this at that point of time. So I think this is a lesson to be learned. People can get very subjective, but when you face a public, and today, of course, when it goes online, in the social media, I think scientists or policymakers can be put to much trouble and great distress, even psychological and even perhaps physical. But the way Swaminathan responded to this over the long term and emerged with his flag flying high, I think as a tribute to those values that come from the freedom movement, that came from his life and work in science, that came from his integrity and the tremendous generosity. Whatever price he got, he put it, apart from gifting his family estate to the foundation, whatever he got in the last 3 decades, or not more or less, comparable to what M.S. Subbulakshmi, the great singer, did, I think went into the foundation and for the public good. These are characteristics that I observed over time, and I think the archive would be a great resource for people to study it. Again, I emphasize not in a hagiographic way, but critically, bringing out the weaknesses as well. That if Venkat and others can help identify a good biographer, I'm sure the MSSRF would be able to support this in due measure. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Ram. We have quite a bit of time, actually, which is fantastic. So we have time for questions, reflections, comments from the audience, or if you want to test the archive, we can run a few searches. And we are happy to be embarrassed if we can't find an answer to your search. But questions, comments from people in the audience, and we have mics that can go around.
This is really a great moment, because I know what this means to the archives. I wanted you to share a little more about this processing that goes on, because I feel sometimes this is an opportunity to talk about how we process all this material. It's a foundation already to the description or the how did you put this together, and have you already worked out the cross-referencing system between this collection and other things that you have?
Thank you. Thanks, Indra. The process of the archive, I mean, there's an entire field to this, but to give some context for those of you who are not from the space, generally archives try and preserve context from where things are received. That's above everything else. That's the thing that we are obsessed about, trying to find patterns in existing data, in the way it's kept, in the way it's arranged, and try and find meaning within that space. So as a group, we have been actually extremely conservative in that approach. We've retained things as received. So, you know, if you really were to investigate the collection, you might ask questions like, why is this letter here as opposed to being in a different section? And there is an entire arrangement note that we have shared there to explain why things are the way they are. We may have made mistakes as well, and that's something that we're happy to fix if we find those. And we, of course, encourage people to look into it to find those things for us. But the arrangement structures try and preserve provenance or origin, and they preserve original order or the way things were kept. We do this, there's a certain conceit in this, if I may, which is that, there's a certain belief that this is the way the person who created the material kept it. Of course, there's every likelihood that the material was arranged and kept and had changed many hands in between. So whose order and understanding are we preserving is a larger archival question that if you go on the web, you'll find various papers around the concept of the archive and the problematizing of the archive. To answer the second question about the interconnections, the short one is not yet. We have made connections within the collection. So you may find the occasional letter where you'll also see a note saying, see also this letter or see also this research note. But one of the things that we're working on is building tools to be able to make these connections. And that's a sort of a side project that we're trying to develop. But at this stage, every single description that you see on the catalog, every word that you see there is the hard work of the 8 people that I had mentioned earlier, which means they have gone through every letter, every report, every photograph, and try to make sense of it the best they can. So it's really to their credit, and I have to again sort of give a shout out to Dr. Raman for having initiated this process before it moved here to Bangalore. Thank you.
How long did it take?
Someone has to, maybe the folks online can back me up because I'm losing dates. We started early days of the lockdown.
Yeah, we started in September 2021, August 2021, when I came to NCBS, and Ravi started working on the first accession in August 21.
Right. So that's the voice of Sanjana. So that's the second accession, but there was also quite a bit of work done by Sangeeta at MSR when she was there. So overall, I would say about a year, of intense work by a variety of people with gaps in between and such. And as is the case for most collections, a few sleepless nights in the last week.
Do you read out anything?
Yes. Again, so in this particular collection, we have been relatively conservative. We would normally not keep media articles because we would rely on media archives to keep that. But this is just such an extraordinary piece of curation that it just didn't make sense for us to weed that out. It is quite priceless. We do weed out things. We routinely weed out things that are copies. So there are many draft reports. There would be a report from IRRI at some point. There would be 10 copies of it. It's all the same. It's probably useful to point out at this point that this collection, if we strictly scrutinize the collection, a lot of the material should ideally be also at various government archives. Accessibility is a different question, but ideally those should have gone through the ministries all the way to a local state archive, regional archive, or a national archive. So we've taken. So what we have done is we have not thrown any of that. So we've kept everything, even though we think there should be a copy of it. So these are not unique documents in that sense. So we've not weeded these things out. There might be a draft report from, say, the 1960s of IARI, which in theory should have also found its way to the National Archives. We have definitely weeded out a lot of material that we think is either duplicated or is there might be the occasional personal material which we would try and return back to the family. So the archive doesn't keep personal financial details or personal medical records. If we find those, we kept them separate. We had a little difficulty in separating between MSS and MSSRF, as is perhaps just generally understood. So this was initially difficult, especially in the late 80s, early 90s material. So there too, we've been relatively conservative. We've kept material, but we also have boxes of material that we have kept aside to send back to MSSRF. There is Sangeeta also worked. Sangeeta was the first archivist on this. She worked on a separate collection for MSSRF, which is at the foundation right now. And those are sort of administrative documents related to the foundation. But short answer, we've been relatively conservative with this collection. We remove things that we are absolutely sure that are duplicates and can be found elsewhere relatively easily. That said, we've also, I mean, we know, for instance, that you can find all the journal articles written by MSS, but we've kept it here. Some of the decisions that we've taken are a response to the society that we live in, which is asking questions about what is truly accessible. And so we take decisions sometimes based on that, which is not an archival way of thinking. It's a response to the space that we live in.
Can you give us an idea of how much of the Borlaug Swaminathan exchange or related partnership is it contained in the archives? Just an impression.
So we did this, Soumya, you have to back me up if I'm, sort of. So we did this earlier today. We just did a general Borlaug search. If any of you on your phones, you can do a Borlaug search on the archive and let me know what you find. There aren't that many letters. There are maybe about 3 or 4 letters between them, directly between them. There is plenty of photographs, from all the various visits. And Dr. Raman, please also, you should also just correct me. There are reports where Borlaug is referenced. Of course, the Mexican Research Center is referenced throughout the collection. And so there's sort of peripheral connections to Borlaug. But the kind of direct back and forth letters that one might imagine in the early 60s is not what is there in the collection. There are, sporadic letters, but it's not a back and forth constant, which doesn't mean that they don't exist. It's just telling you what we have. So which is why, we pointed out that this is the beginning of the archive.
There would be a Borlaug archive.
There is a Borlaug archive.
Yes, there is a Borlaug archive in Texas A&M, George Bush Museum. And you send an archivist there. Yes.
From your lips to God's ears, similar to Obey Siddiqui's papers, which are kept here, but Siddiqui's correspondence with other people like Seymour Benzer are at the Caltech archives, and I've had the privilege to be able to sort of see that, and we can make these connections across different archives. So this will happen over and over again, hopefully. And this connects to Indira's point about trying to really connect archives. If you don't mind, could you just take the mic, because it's also being, it's for the folks on Zoom.
Was there a digital part of his own archives? What he put on a computer or his emails, etc.
Yeah. So this.
The second question I have is, what is the archive tell you about MS Swaminathan as an archivist? Was he particular about writing notes of the day or his diaries? What does it tell you about his own sense of the importance of his papers?
I think the second one's easy to answer. The material speaks for itself. The fact that it exists, I think, is testament. I mean, I don't want to read too much into this because there are many people in the audience who could perhaps answer this question. But every time we receive collections, it's not to be said lightly. The existence of a paper document today is an unlikely event. If it has survived 60 years, it is an unlikely event. We might take it for granted, but there are any number of reasons why it would have been erased from history. But the fact that there are these 48,000 documents or objects that are sitting down there is remarkable. And I would love for someone in the audience to sort of just, we perhaps reflect, if, maybe from the trustees, about why this happened. The answer to the first part, this archive is incomplete, even with the material that it has. We have been fortunate to receive the email records. We haven't done anything about it yet. So this is about 15 years of email records that we have to sift through. We're not even touching the tweets yet.
Yeah.
Please.
In answer to that, how did he maintain these records? I noted as a trustee, and there are others here, Madhura and Namaswamy. Even after he retired, as he was no longer chair, then I attended a trustees meeting. In fact, my wife Mariam was also. No, I'm not. As soon as it was over, in every meeting, Professor Swaminathan would go to his office room and dictate to his secretary immediately before anything else what happened, because he would not note it. In the old days, I suppose he would have written it in hand or typed it, immediately dictated, and this is still the best. These are still the best minutes
substantive minutes of any meeting, and he was not called upon to do it at all. It was a lifelong habit.
Thank you. And that's just very evident in the collection. And so this context is very useful. So I hope that sort of gives some, shed some light to your question. Any other questions from the audience? Please. Oh, look. Peter, sit there, sir.
Thank you, Professor Satish, for giving me this opportunity. I can only introduce myself as a student of Swaminathan. Worked with him for 18 years. IRA from PhD. Visitor of Bengal Jute. Teasing me, how are you going jute in Delhi? When there is the storm that or summer temperatures very rigid. So I had to face all the but for Dr. Swaminathan, I would not have been able to complete my thesis. And at the time of correcting my thesis, he said, why are you rough typing it? Your handwriting is quite readable. He gave me a handwritten, but leave a nice margin for me to go hand. So, and he would call me because I believe that after that 1960s. Yeah, 60s. He would call me on a Sunday and be 12, Bangalore, and mother was a school girl, or even younger. And we used to sit on my home and correct the manuscript. And in between, one Dr. Kanungo used to come and take away his time. And Mrs. Swaminathan very cleverly was whisking away to the other room. And it was a real ordeal for him to correct pieces. But he did it. And he saved a lot of my time for this. And I'm very proud to say that that thesis was given the Jawaharlal Nehru Award in 1960. All encouragement and meticulous correction we made in the thesis matter. And another thing I used to recall is the Green Revolution era in which I was a part. And all of us used. Dr. Swaminathan selected a village, Jonti, Tanjavara block of Haryana. And we used to go there by the Institute bus, all of us, the Jonti Village Seed Project, which is the birth of the Green Revolution, you can say. And then Indira Gandhi also came, and then she gave him a challenge. He said, I will give you a challenge. If you stop this PL 480 import of wheat saving, then I will give everything to you. So then she said, then he said, yes, please visit us. So she came, the IRA bus, can you imagine, with all the Prime Minister in Indira Gandhi. And we all went in a crowd, we ate makki ki roti and the Punjabi farmers, you know, and it was great fun, I tell you. And I don't think any Prime Minister has encouraged scientific improvement as one. I don't want to give the other negative part of the today's politics. And I will tell you one more reason why I'm anxious. There are 17 biographies written by Professor. Mine, first biography was the 7th one. Now this says it's I've already given to Professor. Now I would like to ask you, every biography has got its own individuality. Authors. Raman has also written a biography in Tamil. My wife wrote a short one in Malayalam. Now she wants to translate this. Before that, I want the audience's response. How to proceed? There can be only one biography. There cannot be after the 17 biographies. Then it becomes a competition, you know. But biography is only a historical document of a person's contribution to green revolution. There is no competition. This is a statement of facts. So I have sent copies to Professor Ram, his comments also, and it will receive his comments. Just after, see, all of us are not great authors. We are not Shakespeare or Goldsmith, but at our level, we want the person's image to be developed to be noticeable. That is it. As a student and colleague of Swaminathan, he's 10 years older than me, but now I know how I'm walking. So last time when I went to see him, when I was there, he was on wheelchair, he could not speak even properly. I was really shocked with that. 97 and 80-year-old man. So I wish to. Anyway, all these documents are there. Inaugurated by him. You can see it. But the main thing I want to say. See, on 20 September, we had a meeting of the ICAR, CBCRA, and other institutions, Retired Scientists Association meeting. And then we had a proposal to pass a resolution in that meeting. Everybody was unanimous. The gave a number the past director of CBCRA was the president. And one of the Highness Rangpur Maharajas was also there in that meeting, Auditorium. So I proposed a draft. I read it out. You can criticize it or you can appreciate it. And we want a similar draft in this August audience. We heard very politicians. It was enormous resolution. We, the president, retired and serving agricultural scientists of ICR CPCRA, do hereby resolve to request the Union Cabinet and Ministers, honorable members of Indian Parliament, to propose the name of Professor M.S. Swaminathan FRS, the conferment of our nation's highest honor of Bharat Ratna, as he is already a Padma Vibhushan since 1989. And is hailed as the father of Indian Revolution in Asia. We request His Highness Avitam Tirunal Sri Aditya Verma to forward this unanimous, he was the chief guest, to forward this unanimous resolution to the honorable members of Union Parliament and the Union Cabinet of Ministers. Support this resolution to Her Excellency the President of India, confer this highest honor on Professor M.S. Swaminathan. So this was unanimously passed. So I request, if you agree,
Yeah, we'll agree, sir.
you may find me amateurish, but we want our topmost scientists to put. After C. Raman, I don't know, whether it is Korean was high time.
Yeah.
We should think hardly over it. Remember that Dr. Swaminathan is 10 years older than me, so. So I finally I wish to thank Professor and his colleagues for the wonderful idea. I saw the archives today, and particularly he has given an archives on Professor Siddiqui. Wonderful collection. I had the privilege of working with Dr. Siddiqui in sometimes Bombay, and that's why I was so delighted. What a great work he is doing.
Thanks a lot.
And as one man to support him in whatever manner he wants. He can ask you any question, you have to answer. And I'm still awaiting the guidance and comments of Professor Ram on the book and how to improve on that. Thank you very much.
All right, you heard Dr. Iyer. But thank you so much. And we have time for more questions. If we have, I was really hoping someone in the audience would just challenge the archive catalog and see if something is there. So we're willing to put ourselves online and be embarrassed. So
Is there something on family?
family. Famine. Famines on famine. sorry, I've never done this search. So this is something that we enjoy doing, and if we don't find it, we'll. So in general, this is what you would do. You would go to the archive. You would. So there is the article that I pointed out during the conversation. So the collection, there are four objects that come up for famine. There is what I can see is a report about Need There Be a Famine, which I had shared an excerpt from. There is series 2. So this looks like correspondence with A.S. Sirohi. There is, of course, tons of material from print media conversations with Swaminathan, which sort of cover this. But the reason I ask for your indulgence is that every time we get a question like this, we will, as a team, go back to the archive and say, is there something in the archive that we haven't described in a way that will help this researcher? So we will go back to the archive. It should be more than 4 items. So we will go back and sort of, see which are the other things that we need to re-describe. So as archivists, as Indra, as you know this more than anyone else here, our primary job is description. We build bridges to the material. And making sense of it is really what we do. So keep the questions coming. The moment Mr. Ram asked about board log, this weekend was spent trying to hunt board log down. And there are a few other things that we will be adding to the collection because of that question. Tanishka.
So one of the things that I know about, and I know very little about this subject, is from my own perspective, as looking at design history, is about this massive event that happened in 1977 called Agri Expo in New Delhi. And I wondered if anything about, it was an first agricultural exhibition that happened in Pragati Maidan. I wonder if there's anything about that.
Okay, I can do the search, but I'm going to call on the archive hive in the audience and those online. If you guys remember anything about this. Anybody remembers? Sanjana, if you're still there.
Popularly known as Agri Expo 77.
No idea. I'm just going to do the search that you would if you went online. Let's be embarrassed. Okay. Sorry, Tanishka, not yet. But I'm also not hearing anything from the others. So there's a possibility it's not there. But there's a bunch of other expos from later in time. So probably not there, but that probably just means either we haven't described it or it's not entered the archive. It's one of those two things. Good. We needed searches that we don't have responses to. We're taking notes. Sorry, we can do the, we should have a more sort of blastish note to end this conversation before we go outside and you actually come and check out the archive and all the merchandise that Aditi has worked on. But any other questions, comments, reflections from the audience before we march our way out?
What I'd like to do is that we have a photo lab at IRI.
Dr. Singh, if you don't mind, we'll just, for the people on Zoom, just get the mic.
I just want to say that we have a photo lab at IRI, and we have very good collections of photographs. Working in the field, in the lab, and having meeting with different delegations. So we would be happy to share all those information.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Thanks for this offer. Thank you. Yeah, we promise to take care of it. So that's literally our only job. Please.
And I just wanted to say 2 things. One, Venkat has already said that my father is still and was a terrific correspondent, and he wrote letters to so many people, so handwritten letters. So if we also have them, or the word can be passed out, and we could get copies of those letters, that would be great. Yeah, you have many letters, I'm sure. And the second is that the next project that we want to get started on is a kind of a museum or permanent exhibition in Chennai. So any ideas on that and stuff?
Thanks, Mudra. Yeah, and for this exhibition, of course, you have an archive, but we're also happy to connect you to various other archives if people are interested, because archives love speaking to each other. We get a thrill when someone asks a question of us. So give us the opportunity to try and find those stories for you. But yes, we're very serious. So if you have one envelope at home, one letter, anything, it doesn't matter. We know it's a 48,000 object collection, but if you have one letter at home, we are happy to receive it and would be very grateful for that donation. So, thank you. Okay, if there are no more further questions, we have a table outside with some bookmarks, postcards, drawing from the collection, and also original artwork that's been created for this launch. We also have some refreshments outside, and my colleague Soumya, if you could just raise your hand, is there to help you, get tours of the archive, and of course I'm there as well, and my other colleagues Deepika and Samira as well are here, and so we could. So if you don't mind, again, thank you so much to the trustees, to TNQ, to NCBS to make this possible, and we look forward to seeing you in the archive. Thank you. To folks online, sorry you can't join the refreshments, but see you around.